Thomas's position on Jesus' relationship to the Father, with particular regards to the authority that he derives from the Father. So, one question, for example. Why do you think that Jesus prays before raising Lazarus from the dead?
The Old Testament says that God is the God of all flesh. If a divine being were to become incarnate, as is claimed of Jesus, and that divine being really became a flesh and blood human being like Jesus, then if he's also had an eternal relationship with the Father, then I don't know if I'd expect him to be an atheist when he entered into creation. So in other words, if the Christian picture is correct, you've got Father and Son for all eternity. Son enters into creation. What's he going to be, an atheist? If he is going to, as part of it is, if he's going to be the ideal human or something like that.
Yeah.
And so
the Son of Man, one might say.
As far as what Jesus is going to do, you would continue the eternal relationship that you've had with the Father, and you would do that through prayer. So,
what I mean to say is, could Jesus have risen Lazarus from the dead of his own accord, on his own authority?
I suppose, yeah.
I suppose.
Because all authority has been given to him.
It's been given to him by God, right? Which the way that I read that is that the Father has delegated the authority that is rightfully his to Jesus. And it's often said to me that Jesus raising people from the dead of his own authority is actually an indication of his divinity. Because we have Old Testament passages of people raising people from the dead, like Elijah and Elisha. And the point is always made that, well, they pray before they rise from the dead. Jesus doesn't pray. But before he raises Lazarus in John chapter 11, he looks upward and says, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so they may believe that you have sent me. And when he says this, he cries out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. So Jesus is not only praying before raising Lazarus, but also saying that I always do this. It's just I'm doing it right now publicly, so there's no confusion that you're the one who sent me to do this. And so, even in instances where Jesus appears to perform miracles of his own accord, such as calming the storm, or indeed raising other people from the dead, like the widow's child, he tells us here in John's Gospel that he always is in communication with God beforehand, but right now he's saying so publicly, so that people will know that he sent him. Why does Jesus need to pray before he raises Lazarus from the dead?
This is the exact same chapter where Jesus declares himself the resurrection and the life.
That's right.
And it's in the same book where Jesus says that he's the one who raises the dead at the resurrection. Everyone who's in their graves will hear the voice of the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
So if you're thinking that when we talk about Jesus, we're thinking of him as some rogue deity who does things on his own, that's basically the entire meaning of John chapter 5. John chapter 5 is basically one response to this. Jesus heals on the Sabbath, and this freaks him out because they say, hey, what are you doing? He says, well, the Father's working until now, I'm working too.
Yeah.
And so since the Father's working, I get to work. You all don't get to work, I get to work. And then they accuse him of claiming to be equal to God. And then he explains it. That it's a verse that Muslims use. He says, by my own self I can do nothing. But if you look at what he's saying, it's I can do nothing separately from the Father. But that's the same chapter where he claims that he's the final judge, where he claims that he's the one who raises the dead at the resurrection, and he explains it and says, for the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Mm-hmm. The only way you'd honor the Son the same way you honor the Father is if they have the same nature and attributes. You wouldn't honor anyone else like you honor God.
Interesting. Do you believe
so Jesus is saying that the reason he's the one who judges everything is so that we honor him the same way we honor the Father. That sounds...
Do you believe that the Father has a distinct loving relationship to the Son compared to the loving relationship he has to all of us, say?
Yep.
Only because I've heard you make this point before, that he says that it's that word "as" is quite important. What you just said, so that he will honor, so that they will honor me just as they honor the Father. That word "just as" is kathos, which I mentioned earlier. That's also used when Jesus says, "So they will know that you have loved me just as you have loved them." So if we're going to be consistent in our usage of the term here, if Jesus is saying like that they will honor you that they'll honor me just as you honor the Father, then the loving relationship has to be treated in the same way, right?
Well, I think you can say, I'm trying to think, if you say that, I could say, I love this person just as I love my wife. And yeah, you'd be right. I could say, well, I just mean I love both of them, but not in, that wouldn't necessarily be saying I love that person exactly as I love my wife. But
that's why there are two words in the Greek. That's why there's like the word for as.
No, I'm fine there. I'm talking about, you have to interpret words in context.
Yeah.
And what's the context of this? It's Jesus claims that since the Father is working, he's working also. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because the discussion among the rabbis was,
does God work on the Sabbath?
Does God work on the Sabbath?
Yeah.
And so Jesus is working, so God works on the Sabbath because he's upholding and sustaining the universe, therefore I get to work on the Sabbath as well. And then, hey, you're claiming to be, they think he's claiming to be another God. And he clarifies, no, by myself I can do nothing. He points this out, and in this context, he's the final judge. And so you will honor the Son just as you honor the Father. There, in context, it would be very strange to say, well, I just mean honor me in some sense, like you honor the Father, but not in that way. The Old Testament, Yahweh's the one who sets up his throne to judge. Jesus is the one who says all judgment is given to him.
Given, yeah.
Yeah. And so if all judgment is given to him, and keep in mind, the Old Testament says Yahweh is the one who's going to judge. And you're saying, yeah, but it's given to Jesus.
Yeah.
And he says it's so that we honor him the same way we honor the Father.
Yeah, okay, so I want to talk about this Sabbath moment because